This is a Momentum Media production.
Nerd alert! Property Nerds, the home for data-driven property investors, where we uncover Australia's hot and cold markets, latest headlines and trends.
Hello. This is Arjun here, and I'm here with my good. I was gonna say
my good wife,
my good friend, but I was just like, it's my wife.
My good wife.
So you know what? Let's keep that in there. Let's keep that in there. Let's keep going. So my good wife, Leigh Paliwal, and we've got a pretty cool episode here today because there's the number 3. Hey, I just noticed the number 3, right? I always use the number 3 like in everything I do. Have you noticed that?
And me too. I feel like it's our lucky number. Yeah, I've claimed it as my lucky number as well.
That's right. So we're talking 3s today because we've got 3 sets of insights beyond our typical finance updates and other data point updates that we've got for all our listeners today. And I'm pretty pumped to go through that together with Leigh. A lot of insights being produced by the Investec Advise Agency research team that we'll run through today. And also a special shout out is that if you do hang around to the end of the episode, the team and I have been working together on a very, very unique resource, and it's actually all about how we categorize markets. Now, this is going to be the most important thing coming off the back of a huge boom where everything everywhere grew along really well. So what do I mean by categorize markets? It's like, how does the Investec research team put cities in different buckets? Things that are earlier in their cycle, hotspotting in their cycle, maybe things that have grown, cooled down, and we think will grow again, what we refer to as second wind markets. So we call them early adopters, hotspots, and second winds. And so after years of, trying to develop this resource in terms of how we can actually simply explain it to people, we finally come up with a one-pager that can actually simply explain this. So I'm keen as a first. It's nowhere on the internet, no website, nothing. I'm keen to give it away totally free so people can understand how we do this. All you have to do is drop Nikita, Nikita. So that's our office manager here at Investikit. It's Nikita at investikit.com.au. Just drop her an email and at the subject line, say market category or market categorization, anything, and she'll send that through. Now, I just realized I said stay to the end to know what we're going to give away, and I was going to explain how to give away, and I just gave it all away. So, yeah, stop that. You don't need to stay to the end. I'm totally bad at this stuff.
Stop listening now. Feel free to do
so I was just like, stay to the end, and I was hopefully going to make it all secretive so I could tell you how to do it, and then you tune into the end, and then maybe I send it out now, and this shows me who really listens, but that experiment is no longer legit. It's no longer on. I will just give it away. Just please do ask and we will send this to you. So
that's a market categorization report, one-pager.
Yeah, correct. Cool. It's essentially, how we, strip markets into different buckets and decide on which cycle positioning they're in. And we go through the indicators, the pros and cons and things to look at. And it's a pretty cool document. It's also got some interactive charts there, so It helps. So yeah, anyone after that, thank you for firstly being our audience here, tuning in. And speaking of the audience, we actually are trading very close to 200,000 total downloads.
Yeah, how exciting.
It hasn't even been 2 years. That's pretty cool, hasn't it?
That's fantastic. It is amazing.
So I'm very grateful.
So it's good to know that there's valuable information that people are, wanting to come back and listen to, which is exciting.
I reckon it's all you, Leigh.
No, not at all. I'm just the finance person.
Don't judge finance. But hey, so yeah, the 3s. We talked about the 3s. We've got 3 cool topics to jump into today. But before we do, there's obviously lots going on in the finance world. And Leigh, I'm keen to hear your thoughts on kind of how the world of finance is tracking, lending's tracking, and just run through some data that you're seeing.
Yeah, so we're here in October, and last week there was the 6th cash rate increase that was announced. So essentially over the past 6 months, our RBA has increased the cash rate, and now it's at 2.61%, which has come all the way from 0.1% 6 months ago. So, the first was a 0.25% increase. The next 4 were 0.5% increases. So we saw quite a rapid, 2% increases in total in 4 months. And we've seen a little bit of a dial back, which is interesting, of a 0.25% increase for October cash rate. And so I guess that is interesting, because does that possibly mean that the RBA believes we're near the end of the cash rate increase cycle? Obviously more cash rate increase hikes could be certain, with, RBA revealing it expects an increase, to continue for its interest rates for the further period ahead. But this could be an indicator that it's, starting to slow down.
Well, it makes sense to an extent, right? Because I guess there's 2 things that we think of. Number one is, when we think of lending, assessment rates are naturally moving with the interest rate.
That's right. Every increase.
Yeah, and that's why you're seeing on your world, Leigh, a 20% borrowing capacity reduction. So funnily enough, I actually saw a post of Tom Panos. Tom Panos did this, and he was talking about how people are losing borrowing capacity, which I know you've got some examples to run through. But on that note, with interest rates rising, it makes sense from the assessment rates. They're now reaching those 7.5, 8% assessment rates. And we're sitting at 5 or 4.5 to sort of 6.5% consumer rates, which are at those peak of assessment rates of before.
Yeah.
So any sort of increases beyond here is kind of saying, hey, 2 years ago, or the last 2 to 3 years of mortgages weren't stress tested under these environments.
No.
Which should be a sign for the RBA to consider that
we need to taper back a little bit.
We need to taper back. And we've actually talked about that in a white paper, that this rate cycle would start to fade away. That was our Australian housing fundamentals. And earlier this year, actually at the start of this year, jumped onto the Weekend Today show, and we talked about the interest rate cycle possibly moving into a neutral and or contraction again in 2023. So keep an eye out. That's sort of our thoughts here. And
so we've still got 3 months to go for the year, but it'll be, I guess my opinion is that we'll be seeing it will taper back, like you said, for the beginning of next year. So so that's where we're at. Now, I like to, as you know, cover off the ABS lending indicators for housing finance. And so the August 2022 numbers have come through. So for total housing, this fell by 3.4% to 27.4 billion after a fall of 8.5% in July. So that's total housing finance, slight fall. And for owner-occupier housing, this fell by 2.7% to 18.5 billion in total. This has remained, though, at 35.8% higher than the pre-pandemic level seen in February 2020.
Yeah. So I guess that's clearly showing that lending is toning down pretty quickly.
Yes.
Which makes sense, right? You've got borrowing capacity changes, you've got interest rate changes,
rapid,
and sentiment changes.
Yeah.
So sentiment, interest rates, borrowing capacity should all make lending change. So naturally that should be occurring. But what was interesting is that it's still, 35.8% higher than pre-pandemic levels, Feb 2020. Clearly shows that, 36% higher for owner-occupiers and 69% higher for investors than pre-pandemic levels. Massive. It's clear that it's still operating at high levels, but just not the same as obviously the peak growth rates, which is understandable considering monetary and sentiment changes.
Exactly. Yeah. So massive call out for the investor lending, like you said, nearly 70% higher.
What's happening on the refinance front? Because obviously, Leigh, I know your team is super busy with refinances these days. And, shout out to your team at Hills Finance. You've also been helping many clients of ours at Investikit with regards to refinancing and getting better interest rates. So reach out to Leigh at, not at Investikit, Leigh.Paliwal at hillsfinance.com.au. But Leigh, what's happening on the external refinancing? Because interestingly, people are now more conscious of their budgets, right, with rate changes?
Definitely. And you mentioned about a 20 to 25% decrease, which I'll cover an example of how that actually looks like. In terms of ABS data information, total housing rose by, and this is for external refinance lending, total refinances that increased by 5.3%. And this is 9.8% higher compared to a year ago. So it's still on an upwards trend for external refinancing. Owner-occupier housing has rose by 2.8%, and this is a new record high, and that's 12.8 billion record. And this is 17.5% higher compared to a year ago. And then investor housing that rose 10.9% to 6.1 billion in investor refinancing for the month of August. So slightly lower at 3.5% lower compared to a year ago. So how this ties in and what that actually looks like in a real life example for our, consumers out there looking to get their loans refinanced. Obviously, as rates increase, it is very vital to, consult your mortgage professional about switching your loan to a lower rate, because as you come off, lots of clients are coming off their fixed rates, for example, you're reverting just back to a standard rate, which could be like, a good half, nearly a whole percent higher than where it could be now, even after those rate increases. Hence, you want to get those reviewed. And it's not only from a refinance point of view, though, it's also very important from a borrowing capacity point of view, too. So when you look and add up the consecutive increases from the RBA, the average household, as we mentioned earlier, their serviceability has decreased approximately 20 to 25% compared to 6 months ago.
That's a big jump. So 20 to 25% is a big change in borrowing capacity, isn't it?
Yeah. And I'll give you an example of how that actually looks like for a standard household. So 2 adults, 2 kids, let's say a combined income of around 150,000 gross before tax. 6 months ago, you could probably borrow about 995,000. Okay. And so since these, if we factor in the recent October rate hike, so 6 rate hikes in a row, that same family is probably looking at around 800,000 borrowing capacity. It's 195K less. That's 20% decrease in borrowing capacity.
This is a great call out, because this is real example,
yes,
real numbers, and it's taking into account the change of interest rates on borrowing power. To me, I see 2 immediate things, right? More expensive areas that are going to see certain incomes not borrow the same naturally have a ripple effect, and they can either buy less purchase prices in the same area, or they would go to different rings, middle, outer, whatever it may be, to fill up that borrowing and still make it valuable. So that's kind of one thing I'm seeing. The second thing I'm just realizing with that is that waiting is not in your favor.
No.
Because if you're waiting, are you hoping for $195,000 cheaper property based on this example of 995 borrowing to 800?
No.
Because you know what? If you're waiting for prices to drop, so is your borrowing capacity too. So it does mean that for every sort of month of rate rise that occurs that you hold off your buying decision, you're actually now seeing your borrowing capacity work against you.
Yeah.
And by the basis of 25% in 6 months, that means that the actual rate of borrowing capacity reduction is outpacing the rate of house price fall, because there is no cities that have dropped 25% over 6 months.
No, it's about a 10 to 15% correction max.
Yeah, and that's even in more of our stressed cities that have seen that. Whereas we actually ran some data, and this is super interesting, and it just shows you the power of national media versus micro markets. We all know that the weighting of data in Australia is dominated by Sydney, Melbourne, and surrounds, and this is because of population concentration. The population of these 2 cities plus surrounding cities is more than a half of the country. Now, from there, you add up slowing markets across parts of Brisbane and other cities, then overall, you get to see a 2/3 population concentration. And so this now means that you all of a sudden have a huge amount of borrowing capacity change, finances change, and the capital growth that's changing, it starts to make the whole country look like that's happening. We actually looked at suburb by suburb data and found that more than half of the country, based on a 1 month, 3 month, or 6 month analysis, is actually rising in prices. Now, this is obviously different suburbs fall in different areas, But that just shows you that there's still so many areas around the country in Australia still rising in prices. But because of this data weighting of the whole country being, put together, naturally people are going to see, hey, prices are falling. So if you're then hoping for prices to fall, even though in almost half, in some areas or more than half areas are actually rising in value, time's against you with a 20 to 25% borrowing capacity reduction. So cool to see that example, Leigh, because it just points out why waiting is probably your enemy in these circumstances.
Yeah, timeliness is important. And I guess while we're on the topic of, finance, it's also the lender that's important too. For example, and I'm pretty sure we touched base on this a couple of podcasts ago, is if you're getting a pre-approval, making sure the lender that you're getting pre-approved for is in fact going to, once that pre-approval is issued, generally they're valid for approximately 90 days in most cases, but making sure as rate increases get applied, that same assessment rate is being honoured for that 90-day period, even if there were rate increases during that approval period as well, to protect you. And so you're not going back to the drawing board each time you're looking in the market. You really, that's a really important point, to make sure the budget on the piece of paper is valid for that 90-day period.
Yeah, definitely great call out. And so that's a very, very thorough and helpful review on the finances, Leigh. So appreciate that. And for anyone, you can rewind this back around the core components, and that's borrowing capacity, the real life changes. Refinancing is the hot topic. And if you're after some support with refinancing, reach out to Leigh's team at Hills Finance. They can most definitely help with that. Experts in very much managing complex portfolios. And lastly, the consideration of finance trends cooling off as a result of obviously the changes that we've seen in conditions, but still 20 to 35%, depending on investor or owner occupier, higher finance than pre-pandemic.
To simplify that, just to wrap it up, is...
Wrap up with the wrap up. Love it.
To wrap it up with another wrap up is... each 0.5 increase was a 5% decrease on your borrowing capacity, right? So the recent increase is a 2.5% decrease on your borrowing capacity, essentially. So each time those cash rate increases are passed on, it just turn that into a percentage. So it's 0.25, it's 2.5% essentially decrease on your borrowing capacity.
Makes sense. Thank you so much. And so we talk about the number 3 at the start of the session, and I've actually remembered about where I came up with the whole idea of the 3 thing. So I remember either reading up somewhere or getting some public speaking support. And for anyone who's tuned into previous podcasts or heard about me saying things in 3s, what happens is that
it happens for everything, by the way, even everything.
I mean, everything.
What you're going to eat.
Yeah. Big time. So the whole 3 thing comes from, say if someone asks me a question and they go, so Arjun, what are your thoughts on, or what do you think that, or how do you feel about? I kind of, if I haven't thought about it or studied the answer in detail, but I have some thoughts, but I need to recollect the thoughts. Instead of all the ums and ahs and thinking, I say, well, I've got 3 ideas or 3 thoughts here. And then I put myself under mental pressure to come up with 3 things. And so as I'm going and saying it and recollecting thoughts, I'm also thinking about the next one.
And I also call you out when you get stumbled on number 2. And I'm like, where's the 3rd one?
Yeah, now you know so much about it, right? But I mean, this is a super helpful tip. So anyone out there who's thinking of any communication or public speaking or just improving that in terms of that, it's helped me a lot by coming up with the number 3 and just challenging yourself, throw it out there. Someone goes, oh, what are your thoughts on this? Well, my favorite thoughts are, I've got three thoughts on this, and it just challenges you mentally to come up with an actual paragraph on talking points.
And also, what is your best, middle, and worst case? That is something you regularly bring up.
Yes.
This is very relatable to what you guys do in Investikit. What is the best, middle, and worst case scenarios? Understanding what those 3 look like. So
always,
it's very transferable to many things. So you guys do blog posts quite regularly on the Investikit website, right? How often do these come through?
So these are, very, very deep pieces of research that we release each week. And our data team and research team, so myself as the head of research, we've got Anas, our data scientist, Jung, our research analyst, and Larissa, our research associate. We all come together to create content like these research posts that I'm going to share. Obviously, the first document I talked about, which was our market categorization. Again, If you're after that, just remember to email nikita@investorkit.com.au and pop the market categorization in the subject, and she'll send you a copy. Just give us some patience of a day or two, because last time we had to give out, we had thousands, and a lot of people actually reach out and ask for documents. So we'll happily.
Well, there's 200 subscribers nearly, so there might be
200,000 downloads. So almost 200,000 downloads.
Oh,
right?
wow.
So not 200 subscribers.
200,000, I meant to say.
Yeah. We'd be using a lot of hours. I know we all have to start somewhere, but if we had the 200 subscribers, we'd be using a lot of time to do all that. So from that perspective, we put out these weekly blogs, and we have a keen community of over 10,000 just who follow us on emails, and we send out these blogs each week. And I've got 3 in particular that I wanted to share some detailed data on today.
Well, there's one that I'm firstly most excited about, and it's something that you've kind of come in when you started off InvestorKit. You were really, really focusing on in terms of locations to buy in. And it's actually really, really interesting. So over 85% of Australian population live within 50 kilometers of the coastline. And so obviously there's a very limited number of seaside cities because of that, right? And so Arjun, you and your team at InvestorKit, you dived into some data that actually shows that many Australian inland cities are actually the outperformers, and still the outperformers in the property market. I think, what year was it when you started buying in, for example, Ballarat?
Yeah, so that was
I guess
well before COVID, right? Ballarat, Bendigo, regional Tasmania, regional New South Wales parts. Like, we didn't come into these cities for our clients at COVID because regional was cool. We saw these local economies and the data standing out well before COVID.
Yes.
18, 17, 19.
That's right.
Definitely have some science around, the whole inland water view, sea scarcity thinking that people have, and can bust a few myths on this session.
That's right. And so that most recent blog post from you guys is the 3 outperforming inland cities which have no water view or sea scarcity. That is, you've actually named the top 3 locations in there. So let's go through that. Yeah.
So I guess this research firstly isn't to kind of rule out that you don't buy in seaside cities or anything. That's a silly thought. If anyone's reading this and thinking that, the idea of this research is to respectfully challenge the thinking of, by the beach, near the water, by the ocean, has it got views, as these must-have lists for buying to achieve capital growth. It's not the case at all. And so the highlight here is to basically say, hey, look, there are some inland cities that have really done well. And it's about dissecting the fact that they didn't have water views, seaside scarcity, by the ocean, or beaches, and yet they performed really well. And this is something that we've time and time again found locations that do that, and they offer affordable options to buy property in. And so these 3 cities that stood out were Toowoomba, Ballarat, and Orange. Now, these are talking about their recent performances, so it doesn't mean by any chance that, by any means that we're saying that these are the must-buy locations, but this is proof, and truly proving out to anyone out there that you don't need to be by the ocean to see capital growth. So that was kind of the first core concepts. Now, firstly, let's see where they are, right? Well, they're over 200 kilometers away from the New South Wales or Sydney coastline when you think of Orange as an example. But with Orange, just over the last 2 years, 60% house price growth has occurred. Now, this is important because yes, we can talk about a property boom occurring, but Orange has seen higher performance than many, many major cities over those 2 years. It's outperformed the likes of Sydney and Melbourne just in those 2 years by 60%. And even just over the recent 5 years, to be honest, they've outperformed many cities or most cities across the country. Now, with regards to Ballarat, Ballarat's also done phenomenally. It's the 3rd largest city in Victoria, and house prices have risen 45% over the last 2 years, and even more than when you add the 3, 4, 5 years since when we first started purchasing in Ballarat. Some of Greater Melbourne's seaside regions have moved around that sort of 30% and over the 2-year average. And, some of the regional Vic seaside areas have moved on average of around 48% over the same 2-year period. So Ballarat, as an example, inland has still done really, really well, even though it's nowhere near the beach or the ocean or anything like that. And it's things like this just to consider that you don't have to have all that to see capital growth. Lastly, we had Toowoomba. So Toowoomba is also another, 150 plus kilometers away from the coastline. It's Australia's second largest inland city. I actually tried to purchase there many times personally for our portfolio, Leigh, this year, and we just kept missing out. So unfortunately, that was a miss there. But
we
definitely
ended up in Townsville.
Townsville and Bundaberg were the ones we ended up getting some properties in. But Toowoomba's been a great market. We obviously purchased there for many clients over the last couple of years, and they've performed extremely well. And even over the last 6 months, whilst we've been talking about price declines, borrowing capacity declines, and even declines in terms of house prices in some of our major areas, and interest rate rises, Toowoomba still averaged most suburbs 1% or more per month capital growth over the last 6. That is genuinely a huge property boom still continuing. So it just shows that people over the last 6 months who had been maybe confused or clouded with some of the thinking on interest rates, borrowing capacity changes, you've still seen some great capital growth in Toowoomba. But it's not about the last 6 months. It's about showing that, in history, we've seen many cases like these 3 cities of inland cities still outperforming. So, that's kind of been a big key part.
Yeah. And I guess the main question then is, what is making these areas perform so well? What are the key indicators? Yeah,
it's a great question, Leigh. So firstly, the local economy. And this is funny, when people think of local economies, they think of skyscrapers, they think of everyone in suit and ties and dresses and everything running around. Everything like that does not mean a local economy is strong. That is just a representation and a visual sense of what we think when we're having economy. Just take a look at these 3 cities. We're going to talk about some of the projects, right? Now, if we're talking about some of the projects under construction or even in the pipeline, we have a database that we, access, and it has all of Australia's, constantly rolling applications of infrastructure and currently in progress or in proposed. And we felt when we reviewed this, there were some huge projects. So just to give you some context, Toowoomba has 276 projects in the areas of influence to its local house market. And that represents over $13.3 billion in project value. And this is just the construction or in pipeline stages. Now we've got Ballarat.
Just for Toowoomba.
Yeah, just for Toowoomba alone, right? We've got Ballarat having over 5 billion, Orange over 5 billion. Now this doesn't talk about the projects that they had back then for when they saw this growth, but it just shows you that their local economies are still very, very active, especially when we use data also to divide things on a per capita perspective. We're able to see, yes, it might be small spend in comparison to Sydney, but could it be big spend in comparison to how many people are in that representative city? Unemployment for all of these markets are extremely low. And that's been a big sign as a result of all the job advertisements increasing. Toowoomba's unemployment is still healthy. Although it had a little bit of trend up over recent quarters, it's still healthy. And Ballarat, Orange, everything in Ballarat and Orange is actually below Australia's current trend line. So it just showcases that they have strong local economies.
I think that you're going to go obviously into the next point, but I had a look at the report, and I think the key standout, like any of these regional areas, is definitely the affordability. Like the median house prices for these areas, Orange, $665K. Then we've got Toowoomba, $495K. And then Ballarat, $580K.
Yeah.
That's a big difference from your major cities.
Good call out, Leigh, because the affordability is a piece there, right? And people talk about, affordable and the incomes are lower. Yeah, they are. And so should house prices, right? And they are affordable. We looked at some seaside, if we take a look at Kayama and Port Stephens, they have, local incomes versus local prices, a 9.8 and a 10.9 respective house price to household income ratio. Whereas when you look at Orange, it's 7.7, Ballarat 7.8, Toowoomba 6.3. So, when we compare this to Brisbane, Queensland, Melbourne, Victoria, major cities, Sydney, New South Wales, these cities carry lower house price to household income ratios, and just affordability is definitely a core attraction for many people considering it. Now, the other thing, Leigh, is that alongside affordability, housing inventory is a core part of what causes capital growth. Price growth is always, determined by supply and demand. Now, supply and demand is easier to say. We obviously look at many indicators behind the scenes, but the key thing here is that housing inventory has constantly trended down for markets like Orange and Toowoomba. Toowoomba very much so over recent years, 2020 to 2022. Orange housing inventory has been trending down actually since 2012, 2013, but really started getting low around 2016, heading into 18. So that sort of 18 was when inventory started to get quite low, and that's where the biggest capital growth started from your 2018 onwards in Orange. As for Ballarat, it's actually been quite a good market, quite balanced over the recent decade, but the lowest level of inventory started around 2018 and 19. It did pick up a little bit when COVID first hit at 2020, but then rocketed down. And so inventory, for those wondering, just a very simple metric, it's the number of sales per month on average divided by current levels of stock. So 30 listings in an area, say in Ballarat, and there's 10 sales per month on average that occur, mean 3 months of stock. And that sort of 3.5 months of stock is a balanced level of inventory. And as it continues to trend down, housing becomes more undersupplied because there's less stock versus what sells.
What's an extreme example of an unbalanced market?
Yeah, so an unbalanced market could be anything sort of that 1.5 months and below of inventory, which many locations are at the moment. That just shows that the demand is far better than supply. Obviously, this is available supply and deals happening. That is a core measure, but it doesn't represent all the other conditions of sentiment, economy, and everything. It's more just like the end outcome of everything on the top end that feeds into that data. So hence why it's such a reliable metric for short-term capital growth. Now, that's kind of the core first point of the three, Leigh, which was all about, the fact that you don't have to just sit down and think of all the beachside or seaside locations to buy property. If your budget doesn't permit those areas, or if you're still looking to get ahead and grow wealth, there are many cases of inland cities out there that have performed well. These three I shared are just examples of their performance in recent times that clearly outperform many seaside areas, not all, but put you in the realm of getting into property investing at affordable buy-ins in their cycles.
And just to relate that back to whole finance and borrowing capacities that we were talking about, if we were talking about those three locations and the max kind of average purchase price is around 670K or below, I mean, again, if you've had that 20% reduction in your borrowing capacity, you might have been looking at in, Sydney, CBD, Melbourne, your major CBDs for purchases, while perhaps you need to reconsider and look in some other more affordable areas that suit your budget, which there are. That just proves that that's the case, which is exciting. Cool. All right. Well, the next blog post that we wanted to go through, and this is very in line with obviously the whole mythology and process behind InvestorKit, is due diligence. Why is it important, and what do you cover off? Let's go straight into that.
Yeah, due diligence is a great point, Leigh, and this is the key where you start to recognize professional versus beginner buying.
Yeah.
Right. Now, there are many areas of due diligence, and there's three core categories. You see the three's back again, right? With vengeance. Number one was finance. How much borrowing capacity do you have? Can you afford your loan repayments if interest rates rise? Financial due diligence around, just making your life easier with loan repayments in case of increasing interest rates, like your household budgets. But finance really isn't just even how much you can borrow. It's actually also setting standards for your purchase, like maximum price ranges, minimum yield levels, things that you'd like to see from a rental growth that you're trying to target.
Is the rent covering the repayments, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, whether it is or isn't doesn't mean it has to, but it's more like you're planning and thinking around how this all happens and the potential of changing monetary environments like interest rates. So really that due diligence starts with your household finances, then goes towards banks and unforeseen circumstances. Moving to the second, it's actually market due diligence. And this is where people forget. They think it's just about buying a house with certain things that it has versus it doesn't have. And that's due diligence. Market due diligence is around, is the local economy doing well? Does the property market have great growth potential based on certain indicators? Is the rental demand high? It's unreal how many people don't think of that. The rental demand being high is one of the most important things because it shows you real demand. And then lastly, market due diligence is all about adding more certainty to the likeliness of property having capital growth in your portfolio. Remember,
which we all want.
That's what we're all after. So conduct
we want
that due
a bit
diligence.
Of cash flow or a bit of, the rent to cover the loan repayments and costs, but definitely the capital growth at the end of the day.
Exactly. Now, those are the two core parts of property market selection and finance. But when we come to property purchasing, there's a whole range of due diligence here. And we actually finished one of our biggest due diligence projects recently. Now, that was very, very, very deep and intense. And it was done by our property acquisitions team. So AJ, who's been with me since Investikit first started, he's our head of acquisitions, has his Bachelor of Development, Valuation and Investment, been part of our acquisitions team, facilitating, reviewing, conducting due diligence on many purchases. Imagine just all the different checks that you have to have that a typical buyer doesn't think of. These checks did not come out of thin air, right? They came out of a science, just like we do for growth analysis. We have a science applied to due diligence. Now, to simplify the science as much as possible,
there's more than three in this due
diligence. There's definitely more than three in this part. But to simplify the science as much as possible, Leigh, it's all about what are the core things in property that will make a property take longer to sell or discount more. And they're usually quite connected because just imagine for a moment, you're out there looking to sell your home and it takes far longer to sell than normal. You usually respond in one of two ways. Either you're super stubborn, you reckon you can still get that money and you need a better agent to do it and you just want to get on with life but not discount money, or you do what most do, which is discount property. And this is why days on market is such a core analysis piece of our due diligence, and so is vendor discounting. So we start to look at those two trends. If they show peak and volatility when these due diligence points are applied versus when they're not. So let me just throw out a few. Floods, bushfire.
No one wants to be in a flood zone or bush area.
Flood impact is much more, important. So large scale new developments. Distance to busy roads or on busy roads, train tracks nearby, major power lines and power stations,
cemeteries, obviously.
Cemeteries and industrial sites, land sizes, minimum versus, larger blocks, structural issues, obviously from post-pest and building. These sorts of things all come together. Being on a road with a roundabout directly near your property, having a bus stop right in front of your house versus away from it. All these things are key things in review. And we were able to make a science out of this. And by science, I mean... Literally.
It's like the ingredients to a cake, right? It's like you can't bake a cake properly without the right ingredients. So
definitely. And the key thing is we just want to avoid resale scenarios where possible that have a longer days on market and in turn higher chances of vendor discounting. The areas can still grow, great. You've got your area selection right, but these little checks can be helpful. And so these areas, these things that I mentioned are proven things that can create, heightened days on market. And that was done through the science component, which I mentioned, which is hundreds and hundreds of properties on each due diligence item, creating control groups, creating group A of impact, Group B having multiple impacts, Group A having only that particular due diligence impact, hot periods of markets, cold periods of markets. So we're able to review this in multiple ways. And some of those things I mentioned will increase days on market and will increase chances of discounting. And so when you think you've got an awesome yield, whether it's you're purchasing with a buyer's agent or whether you're purchasing on your own, not all buyer's agents even apply this due diligence. So, when you apply this due diligence to your journey, yes, it'll take longer to find something. Yes, you'll see properties be purchased by others or miss out on some, and that's okay. When it comes to your time to get something, that you've isolated anything that's going to increase your days on market, your chance for vendor discounting in the times where the market's good or bad, in comparison to other properties in the same suburb. So that was the second component, which was due diligence, why it's important and what to cover.
From a finance point of view, clients coming in, they might be new investors or, second-time investors, but they've never used the service of a buyer's agency like InvestorKit, for example. And a lot of people are drawn to the shiny new, brand new build. And so we do come across a few clients who have, gone down that route themselves and gone in for a new build, land and construction. I'm interested to get your take on, because you mentioned one of the points from a due diligence point of view is large-scale new developments in surrounding areas. How does that actually impact the investor? Can you explain that point?
Yeah, so we did a lot of charting on buyers, and if they did go and do purchases where areas had a large building approval percentage in pipeline, how would that correlate with changing prices across hot and cold markets at different thresholds of building approval percentage rates and days on market and vendor discounting? And what we found were that when we start to see higher and higher building approvals as a proportion of incoming stock, so I'll just simplify it even more. If you have, 100 homes and you have 3 properties being built or in approval stage, that's 3% of new pipeline over the next year or two, because that 100 homes in the area are now having 3 new ones being built, which will take it to 103, right? And so we're looking at these percentages of incoming supply as well as, the rate of completion from approval to completions or starts that we're looking at as well in the areas. And all of this stuff coming together, when we see large amounts of new supply kick in, it does start to change those other data points of days on market, vendor discounting, listing inventory, and then, of course, prices. So, yeah, it's just something to think of, that a high growth area with lots of building does not necessarily mean a high price growth area. So it's a high growth region, but may not be high price growth. It has just too many unknown factors, of which some areas you see pop off and they sell more and more and more at higher prices each stage that comes out. Then you see other areas that don't. And so that's just the unknown. There's too much risk in it as your supply percentages increase.
And then the risk of, vacancy rates as well, right? When it comes to from an investor standpoint. Definitely
a core thing. And so the last one is the third and final, number three, is all about regional cities. And this is quite important to bring up in today's deep dive of data, because regional cities, why this is important is we are starting to see or sense that feeling of normal that many people talk about. And with regional cities, many who were against all this or did not want to be believers of all this migration happening are starting to think, oh, well, are they out of trend? Are we seeing people come back?
Miss the shot kind
of
thing.
Miss the shot. Regional cities are, no, COVID's done now in some people's minds. And, regional cities are coming out of trend for property purchase, right? They're not the hot shot that they were in during COVID. Well, yes, obviously there's peak at times of movement, but that does not mean by any means that we're seeing change or losing the steam in regional Australia. Long story short, the core thing here is that JLL, this is a good survey, by the way. JLL's Future of Work Survey 2022 shows that 45% of employers were not offering any form of hybrid working before COVID, whilst now that number has dropped to only 9%. So it starts at the top level employment. It's very clear that people are still offering this far more as an option. And the adoption rates, whilst maybe not at peak adoption rate in terms of COVID and when it first hit, the adoption rate can still grow over time and still play a core part, especially as more and more options are given. The second thing is regional cities are more affordable to locals than capital cities. Now, very important to frame that correctly. Affordable does not just mean cheaper. We have always known regional cities to be cheaper. That's not the thing. But regional cities are more affordable to locals than capital cities. So it means that those living in capital cities versus those living in regional cities, if they look at their own respective markets, even though house prices and incomes vary, capital city incomes higher, house prices higher. Regional incomes lower, regional prices lower. It's the proportion though. Households in capital cities are a little bit more stretched for housing in their own market than those in regional cities in their own market. So it's still relatively affordable. The last thing is on that affordable piece, we actually looked at the measure of overvalue, undervalue, and this was using income levels. And with regards to income levels, we were looking at how they compare in terms of mortgage repayments now, not just prices. And what we found with the affordability is that relative affordability was much higher in regional cities, the highest in Queensland and South Australia in comparison to our capital cities. And this is using now mortgage repayments as a measure, not just prices. So this benchmark was definitely quite interesting to see. 40% of regional New South Wales statistical area, 3 locations were considered affordable or undervalued. 50% regional Victoria, 51% regional Queensland, and of course 88% in regional SA. So very, very affordable there. There are a few more other regions that I've gone through, but that's just an example. Now, this is the really interesting myth buster, and this is the final point on the regional and capital thinking and whether regional cities are out of trend for property purchases. There are actually more job opportunities attracting workers in regional Australia than capital. Isn't that interesting?
That is very interesting. Do you think it goes back to that JLL, type of hybrid working thing that you mentioned with the whole, 9% of employers not offering that option anymore?
No, it's not just that. That plays a key part, but the actual pipeline of jobs was, whether COVID hit or not, was going to trend upwards for regional Australia anyway, based on the projects and local economy pieces going on. Now, it's not just the total jobs, by the way. It's indexed job numbers growth, and it's considering the labour market information portal, the Labour Market Insights is our source. And we looked at the regional job growth versus capital city job growth. There is a surging level of job opportunities in regional Australia, and this will no doubt continue to positively impact their economies and in turn property markets.
Makes sense, because when you were talking about Toowoomba, you said 13-something billion in infrastructure investment.
Yeah,
so
that's just one
obviously that's going to create some jobs. A little bit right there.
Yeah, definitely. And the final piece here, which is just that the fact that supply levels are still declining in regional Australia. So we looked at an interesting data point, and it was basically the total number of existing for sale listings versus population growth. And we kind of created this whole listings per capita trend. And listings for sale is actually, and also listing per capita, is increasing in capital cities, whereas it's decreasing in regional cities. So it does mean that we're seeing regional cities remain more undersupplied and have lower levels of, supply with trending down in comparison to some of our capital cities, which are actually trending up on listings per capita. So this just kind of considers now both the population aspect and listings overall. And this is where we're definitely seeing that shortage in regional Australia for listings in comparison, even when you think of population movements as well, which is greater in our capitals, but obviously with the migration now coming back, that will improve in our capitals. However, migrants don't come back and just immediately buy property. So that's all kind of what we're seeing. The trend is no longer this whole thing of, it must now reverse because COVID's not the same. It was always trending up. COVID gave it the huge explosion that happened, and that obviously structurally changed things. That JLL Future Work Survey is a great example. But we are moving into many regional cities still having stronger local economies relative to their population size. Very key concept there. More job opportunities.
Yeah, relativity is
and
very important.
Low listings to capita in terms of the trend. So that's our insights in terms of 3 core insights I thought we'd jump on and share today, Leigh, and really appreciate you also sharing all the finance trends today. And
appreciate it.
Yeah,
I love that you guys, like you mentioned earlier, you guys are doing this weekly under your news and insights section on InvestorKit, right? Yeah. On the website. So if you guys want to actually go and read it back on that more in depth, with the key data points that Arjun covered off today, you can go on to investigate.com.au and then click on the property market research area button, I should say, and under news and insights. There's also access to the white papers there, which is all free content, which is crazy.
It's been a long episode, hasn't it, today? And I know we could have turned this into multiple episodes, but that's just not us. We just love, shaking and baking it and dropping as much knowledge bombs as we can for everyone here. And I honestly couldn't do this without the Investigate research team who support me day in, day out and putting this content together. And as a team, we've definitely got some exciting pieces to come. But if you'd like that, what I reminded in the earlier part of the episode, just remember to drop Nikita at investigate.com.au an email. And sorry, Nikita, for the bombardment you're about to get. Market categorization. We've got our core document and video to explain how to interpret it. So you can, look at trying to do your research and align them to different cycle points. And if you'd like professional support on that, obviously investigate.com.au is our buyer's agency. And that's it from us at the Property Nerds.
Over and out. Thank you.
Game over.